Hello and welcome to the Butterfly Effect, a show about becoming. In today's episode, I meet Katrice Williams, a person who makes impossible into possible, mostly thanks to her hard work, commitment, but especially love to her children and love to God. Katrice is a person who will share with us a very inspiring journey, starting with her childhood that was filled with trauma and abuse, and yet didn't stop her from pursuing the best education out there, including her degree from Stanford University. Encompassed with that degree, Catrice decided to make a difference in local community, working with civil liberties and human rights issues in Cleveland, Ohio. That's where I met her a couple of years ago at American Civil Liberties Union, where Catrice was working on voting rights and local empowerment. But that wasn't enough for her. She yet again knew that if she wanna make a more powerful difference for Clevelanders, she needed a robust skill set. That's why she ended up in a law school and became an attorney. At the apex of her career and where finally the dream of becoming a lawyer rooted in making a difference come true, Catrice has been faced with yet another challenge. More than a year ago, Gabriel was born to this world with complex multisystem health conditions. Gabriel requires 24/7 medical attention, and Catrice has struggled over the past year to find some providers. But that, yet again, became an impulse to get another skill set. Right now, she is training to become a medical nurse, being able to provide to her son attention and help he deserves and needs on a daily basis. If you would like to support Catrice's journey to acquire this skill set while being a single mother, you can go to this GoFundMe link below this post. And now, I would like to invite you to hear Catrice's story. Catrice, why are you?
So since Gabriel is the name of my son, since he was in the NICU for 81 days, it really challenged my why. Who am I? So throughout my life, I went to church, sometimes read the Bible, not really. Was very familiar with like the typical Bible verses like John 3:16, for God so loved the world, he gave his only begotten son, or I can do all things through Christ for he strengthens me, Philippians 4:13. But in terms of really having a relationship with God, that wasn't there. And something happens when you see your child, right, in a box, a clear box with wires and tubes, a trach going down their throat. Something also deeper happens when the monitor is beeping and sometimes flatlining. And I will never forget the night. It was July 4th, actually, and Gabriel was struggling to breathe again. And they had to, I don't know yet the medical term for it, but I just call it bagging, right? With to make sure that he had consistent oxygen getting into him. And it was a breaking point for me. And the only thing I really can remember being vocalized to me that night was the APRN, one of the, she was a nurse practitioner who was doing this. She was like, if we have to do this all night, we will. But I knew at some point they're going to call it, right? You can't do that all night. Because they needed to find the right rhythm on the machine. So there's different machines. There's a cannula, which is the lowest one there. There's another one. There's the ventilator, and the oscillator is the strongest machine. They tried. The cannula wasn't going to work. The ventilator wasn't working. They had to bring in the oscillator, which is this huge machine. It's just like this loud whirring sound. That's how you know it's bad. And I remember there was, he had a private room, but there was a curtain that I could pull and I could do nothing, but I fell to the floor and I collapsed and I cried. And then I went behind the curtain because I could not see him die. I just couldn't. And I was behind that curtain praying for 15 minutes. It felt like a year, but the nurse finally said, we found a rhythm on the machine. And tears were just pouring down my face because I thought my son was going to die. And I was praying to God. I'm like, God, take me, leave him, allow him to live, but take me. But You can't switch places. It's not possible. And from that moment, I started praying. And I said, God, allow him to live, allow him to leave this hospital. And then my consistent prayer was let him leave with no G-tube, no oxygen, and no trach. And God fulfilled all of those promises in that prayers. And one night when I was sleeping, it was just in the early hours, just before I woke. The one night, it was a voice I heard very clearly. It said, "Your son is dead." And a few nights later, I heard, "I believe in life." And I knew the second voice was the voice of God. So for me, why me? It is because I exist within God. God created me. God thought of me before time. God is my creator, and he knew his purpose for my life even before I knew it. So a short answer is that I became to know why within that space of the NICU and almost seeing my son die. And I know I exist because of God, the Father and the Creator. And I read his word consistently because that's how I get to know him better. And I pray consistently, not just for what he can give me, but for what I can do for him. And that is the only way I'm able to maintain that connection, because you can't work your way to God. There's nothing you can do to please God, because we're not pleasing to God. The only thing that he wants is for us to trust him. And that means also trusting in his character, that God does not lie. God does not fail. God does not forget your prayers. And God is always there for you. So that is why me.
Thank you so much for sharing. And we will return in our conversation to talking more about what's going on today in your life. But at this moment, I would like to go a little bit back to your childhood and ask you, what is your most vivid childhood memory?
My childhood was very traumatic, to say the least. My mother, who was undiagnosed, I do believe she suffered from bipolar disorder, and which means, in a sense, the common symptoms are mood swings, having manic highs, having manic lows. During manic highs, you see a lot of people with bipolar disorder spending a lot of money, not being able to sleep at night because they have these creative spells. They can be very smart and intelligent, but also a lot of the behaviors are uncontrolled. You might see hypersexualization. So she ended up having six of us, six different fathers. I'm the eldest of the six. Um, and I was taken from her custody at 18 months and given over to my grandmother. Um, I was told that I was highly abused. Obviously, I don't have any memories from that age. Um, and but during my grandmother's custody, it wasn't a great home environment either. Exposed to physical and sexual abuse by her husband, I guess ex-husband at the time. Endured that for many, many years. And finally, um, I believe it was my sophomore year of high school, just started applying to summer programs. And for me, the intent was like, how can I get out of that household? And for me, the escape was, if I can apply to programs outside of home, that will allow me to get out of that environment. So beginning in the summer after my sophomore year of high school, I did a week-long program at North Carolina State University, some leadership program. I ended up going through to, I believe it was Indiana University, through Telluride Association. They sponsored Rising Juniors for 6 weeks to kind of study college, a 6 weeks college seminar. And we lived in a dorm. We had two dorm residents who monitored us because we're 15 and 16-year-olds at this point. And so it was just a fantastic learning opportunity, but for me, it was just a means of escape from the environment I was experiencing at home. Did the same thing my junior year, applied to as many places as I possibly could. And finally, I did discover the United World Colleges, which is I think there's like 14 or 15 colleges around the world now. At the time that I applied, there were only 10. And I didn't realize that there were 10. I thought there was only one school in New Mexico. So I applied to that school, and my mentor, she drove me to Washington, D.C. for the interview. And I wasn't sure if I had gotten it. I had a feeling that I did. And I got this letter in the mail, so congratulations. At the time, when I went to the interview, they asked me to rank the schools, and I was like really confused. I was like, there's only one school in New Mexico. And they were like, no, there's 10 around the world. And I remember I had chosen like Hong Kong as my first school. Italy was one of my other top choices, but they sent me to Wales. I didn't really see Wales per se. I just saw United Kingdom. And never having left the United States, much less the southern United States, I had taken maybe like one plane in my life at that point. Had never applied for a passport or a visa. So I applied for a passport, once I realized that I was accepted. They let me know a month before I was supposed to depart, like, hey, you need a student visa. And I'm like, what's that? And I was able to get that. And I was able to study abroad in Wales from the age of 17, and I finished high school abroad.
And from there, you got into Stanford. How those educational experiences shape you in terms of like how they changed the way you saw each other, you perceived your dreams, and what were your choices back then in terms of majors, different opportunities? Was it also any struggles there?
So attending Wales was difficult for me because I was the only African American who had attended there in 8 years. And at the time, so it was 2004. At that time, I believe we'd been in Iraq for over a year. So there was a lot of anti-American sentiment that I felt that I shouldn't be responsible for as a minority who also experienced a lot of discrimination. And people didn't, especially many African students, didn't seem to understand how could I experience discrimination? It should be a huge benefit to be in America. And I said, the experience of Black Americans is very different at that time, and still is today, right now that we live in this kind of hyper polarized society, was very difficult. I'm like, we still experience income inequality. Even with education, we're still overlooked for job opportunities. Sometimes we can't get past the application submission process because they'll take one look at my name, right, and make assumptions about me as a person versus looking at my credentials and experience. And then I also had to explain, hey, I came from a predominantly Black high school that was under-resourced, underfunded, and with a high teacher turnover rate. I remember the last year I attended, there was like a 17% teacher turnover rate. So a lot of teachers are leaving, so education is not stable. And then having to go into an international environment and an English teacher making presumptions about what I should be able to do. And she was like, well, you have really great thoughts, but your grammar. And I was like, well, that's a function of the schooling that I attended in North Carolina. It's not that I'm incapable, but I was in under-resourced schools. And then even in terms of math, right, there was this expectation that as an American student, I should have a higher level of math. But again, I was like, you have to understand that I don't necessarily have the best education compared to other American students who are coming here. Some of them who come from very wealthy families in Connecticut or Florida or Colorado. Money does translate to resources, including access to tutoring. And then having to deal with that, I did meet a lot of other just diverse cultures when I finally made it to London, and I was on the poetry scene there for a couple of years. And I met British Nigerians. I met British Jamaicans and people who were from Grenada. When I took a trip to France, I met individuals who were from Cameroon and Senegal, and I realized how diverse the world was and that we weren't all isolated to our country. So that really opened me up into having interest in international relations. So I went to Stanford knowing that's what I wanted to major in. And that's what I did. But it was difficult coming back to the United States because you get used to the interconnectedness of travel and of people. And even though California is considered this liberal bastion, you still are coming back into America and into the American mindset. And that was in 2006, so about 20 years ago. So that was a very difficult transition for me. So after my freshman year, I took time off. And went back. I did some humanitarian work in Zambia for a summer. And then I spent about, I think, 8 months in London before a friend told me, you need to go back and finish your university degree.
We met each other at ACLU of Ohio. And I remember back in those days, you really wanted to become a lawyer. And you did. You went after ACLU and got your JD degree. And now the reality is writing a new chapter when you need to revamp your life again. Can you tell us a little bit more about first your commitment to civil liberties, to making a difference and getting that law degree, and now what's happening with your current change in your life?
Absolutely. So the impetus for me getting my law degree, which is a Juris Doctorate here in the United States, and it allows you to then sit for the bar exam, which you need to pass in order to be able to represent people as an attorney. So it looks a little bit different in each country, but that's kind of the process here. So when I was with the ACLU, my focus was voting rights for individuals with disabilities and people with criminal convictions. I went to a lot of halfway houses, a few prisons. I also went to kind of deaf organizations to talk about voting rights. And in the halfway houses and prisons, overwhelmingly, I was like, yeah, voting is necessary, but when I get home, I won't have a job. I won't have housing. I'm dealing with child support that I can't afford. I am dealing with having to pay restitution and I need to get my driver's license back, but I need to file a court motion in order to do that because I have driving suspensions for driving without insurance or unpaid speeding tickets. And so they really just needed legal representation. And there wasn't a huge emphasis on voting. So I was like, let me go to law school. I remember when I was 8 years old, I wanted to be a lawyer, mostly because I just saw Law and Order. But when I was at the ACLU, I felt that I could be more impactful by going to law school. And I took the LSAT. I ended up deciding to go to law school locally at Cleveland State University because it was the most affordable. Other universities wanted me to take out like $100,000 to $200,000 in student loans, and I'm just doing the math. I still had student loans for my prior social work and nonprofit organization master's degrees, so I didn't want to take on more debt. So I chose the 4-year part-time program. Typically, law school in the United States is 3 years once you get a college degree, so 3 years of law school. I ended up doing that. I finished in the spring of 2023. I successfully passed the Ohio bar exam, scored in the 90th percentile, and that allowed me to then transfer my bar score. And I'm also licensed in Massachusetts. So I passed my character and fitness test, all of those things, paid lots of money. Upon kind of passing the bar exam, I started working at the prosecutor's office. Shortly thereafter, I found out that I was pregnant with my second child. He did come my water ruptured prematurely at 26 weeks, and he was delivered at 28 weeks. I was devastated about his premature birth, but I just figured, okay, there's going to be highs and lows in the NICU, but he's going to come out. And other people told me, well, I had a nephew born at 25 weeks and now he's fine. He just has dyslexia. Or I had so-and-so was born at 36 weeks. So-and-so was born at 32 weeks. And you're just hearing all these success stories that even though so many children were premature, they were fine. And so that was the thoughts going in. And was I praying? Yeah, but not to the extent that I was praying when Gabriel got an E. coli infection 8 days post birth. It was a nurse who noticed that something was wrong. And I left thinking, oh, it'll be fine. Then I get a call saying we've intubated him. And then I learned the E. coli had turned into blood sepsis, which means a blood infection for those who don't know. And as everyone should be aware, blood circulates around the whole body, right? It has to. It has to deliver oxygen. And blood also goes to your brain. So if infected blood is going to your brain, that infection can then cause meningitis, which is just inflammation of the meninges in the brain. And once you have that infection, it then gets into the brain tissue and the brain tissue dies. And how the brain heals itself is it kills off the dead tissue and it liquefies. So now you have a situation of the tissue dying, the brain not growing, but as it heals, hydrocephalus. So Gabriel didn't immediately have hydrocephalus. It was just the tissue dying. And when that tissue dies, it affects all functions, heart, lungs, ability to move limbs. And I didn't know all of this at the time. I just know that my son is in this box. More wires are going into him. He's intubated. It's serious. But I'm still getting reassurances like, hey, he could be okay. He could be okay. But by July 3rd, I had finally gone home because I'd been in the hospital at that point for about 6 weeks straight. 2 weeks, I myself being hospitalized, 4 weeks with Gabriel. And the nurse told me, just go home and get some sleep. I did. They called me at 3:30. So they had taken him off he was on 2 seizure medications, Keppra, and phenobarbital. I did not know he had been weaned off of the phenobarbital. His seizures immediately came back. He was intubated again. I believe it was that night, now July 4th, that's when they were bagging him. Long story short, I remember having a DNR conversation. DNR means do not resuscitate. with a team of doctors. I'm crying profusely. His father's crying. But in my heart, I was rejecting. I was like, no, we're going to find a way. He's going to be okay. And a couple of weeks after that conversation, Gabriel started eating on his own. A nurse advocated for us. She was like, he's showing signs of suckling. He had finally latched and in terms of breastfeeding. And by August 22nd, he had taken 8 bottles, 20 milliliters each in a row without aspiration. So, which was fantastic given his level of brain damage. He lost about 50% of his brain tissue. So the conversation of G2 surgery was off the table. So I was super thankful. But again, I'm still not aware of of the level of brain injury that he has in terms of function, and in terms of needing lifelong support and of it being a total and permanent disability. Like those things weren't in my mind. I'm still thinking, oh, with therapies, my son is going to walk, he's going to talk, he's going to be fine, right? I didn't understand when they were making little hand splints for him. I didn't understand when they were giving me the handouts in terms of stretching him, that was a sign that they expected him to have spastic hypertonia, which just means his arms are always contracted. I wasn't understanding that he could be legally blind because he didn't have an occipital lobe. These things were not really shared with me. What was hinted at is that I should take what we call Family Medical Leave Act, which is unpaid leave to care for him. And I'm thinking, okay, I'll care for him, but like things will be fine. It's not clicking to me that this is going to be my role as a lifelong caregiver. So I've shifted really from representing individuals with criminal convictions to now advocating for medically complex children because of what happened with my own son. He was denied for 2 Medicaid waivers. When he left the NICU, again, he's not on oxygen or tracheotomy or a gastrointestinal tube, right? He doesn't have any of that, but he still can't move his arms. His hands were in tight fists. At the time, I didn't know that those were called muscle contractures. I just thought, oh, that's just how he is. They said, oh, he's like any other baby, right? Again, this is playing into my belief that everything is going to be fine, my false belief. But that was my worldview at that point, because I am taking my premature son home. I have post-traumatic stress and depression and anxiety. I did not have the postpartum period that I needed. I didn't have the support that I needed to adequately pump breast milk. I had to appeal the denial of his medical waivers. They kept saying that it was my quote unquote local parentis duty to support him, which is just legalese for saying, as a parent, I'm legally obligated to financially support him. But you're also saying I also have to physically care for him every single day, take him to all of these therapies. So how am I supposed to balance the caregiving role that's full-time 24/7? And he's still waking up every 2 to 3 hours. So I'm not getting any sleep, but also financially support him and my other child. Those two things don't reconcile. And then I discovered over the months that he had hydrocephalus because I talked about that brain injury, right? How the brain, the fluid builds up in the brain. We discovered that when a nurse came to do a home visit and she measured his head circumference, and his brain had grown as 1 centimeter within a week, which is very, very abnormal. A child's head circumference should not exceed 1/4 to 1/2 centimeter in 1 week, and then it slows down, but his was accelerating. So we took him for a CT scan through the emergency room because that was the fastest way to get at the result, and it confirmed. I'm still crying, because this is his now 3rd hospitalization since he left the NICU. The pediatric neurosurgeon is saying if he does not get ventricular peritoneal shunt to drain the fluid is going to cause pressure on his remaining tissue and kill him. I'm not hugely versed in biology at this point. I'm still learning. And like that's freaking me out. And I'm like, no, he doesn't need a shunt. Like he's fine. You don't need to cut into his brain. And I'm just saying, no, no, no. And she's saying like, he has to have this. And I get a second opinion at Boston Children's Medical Hospital. I fly him to Boston because I'm like convinced there's got to be some other way. And they confirm like, no, he needs a surgery. He had that surgery actually 1 year ago. And it was successful. It helped to relieve a lot of the pressure on his brain. But 2 more hospitalizations followed after that. And I think it was after the 5th hospitalization that I prayed again. And I said, God, do you want me to go to nursing school? because this has now been about 8 months, no nurse, no success in finding someone to help manage his medical care. I'm slowly beginning to accept that he has a total and permanent disability. I'm beginning to accept that this is going to be a lifelong role for me. And it hasn't yet clicked that the level of care that Gabriel needs. I'm still thinking that we could manage with the nanny that I had to pay privately. His father was paying a proportion, but it was a disproportionate amount. I was paying more relative to our incomes. And I decided to go to nursing school because I realized he had finally gotten the Medicaid waiver in January after they did another assessment after his brain surgery. And somehow the brain surgery convinced them that he needed a hospital level of care, which he does. But I couldn't be his paid caregiver, even though I was spending hours with him in therapies each week, going to specialists. The only way I could be paid to be his caregiver was to become a nurse, a licensed practical nurse or registered nurse, which meant taking anatomy and physiology 1 and 2, microbiology, doing clinical rotations and med surge, the psych ward, the pediatrics, maternity, like all of these different rotations. And so I'm about a year into the process now, or 9 months thereabout. And as I've learned more in these science courses, a lot of what's going on with him medically makes sense. Why are we giving certain medications to treat certain things, whether or not to treat his spasticity or to treat his seizures? Understanding that the seizure medications can only be titrated up so much because you actually need brain cells for the medication to act upon. I know that sounds quite crass, but right, you can't continue to go up if you don't have brain cells for the medicine to act on, right? And that you do think medications based upon weight and age as well. So I've met a lot of other moms who have been forced to leave their employment to care for their children. And this is not just moms with medically complex children, children who have severe autism, right? Particularly with behaviors. Moms have had to leave the workforce. Children with Down syndrome and heart conditions, children with Down syndrome tend to have what we call FOP, foramen ovale patent, where the hole that should close at birth doesn't close, so they require heart surgery. Some of them do have autism and other disorders. So those parents, 95% of whom are mothers, have to leave work or significantly reduce their work hours to care for their children. And often it is unpaid. I did meet a mom when I took Gabriel on a 7-day trip to Ireland. I just noticed out of the corner of my eye, I saw her, and she used to be a speech pathologist before she became a full-time caregiver to her daughter. And while Ireland does pay for all the medical equipment for her daughter, the monthly stipend of 300 euros only lasts 3 years. So a lot of mothers are dependent upon their husbands or male partners to help provide health insurance, to help provide income and housing. So, and they can't work because of their role.
I can see there is a pattern there that wherever you're faced with something, whether it is challenges at home that you made into the opportunity to go to United World College and Stanford, whether it is challenges in your local community that you coined into becoming a lawyer and fighting for making the structural difference and more equity in Cleveland. And now having Gabriel, you becoming a nurse and trying to put all of that together with skill set that can respond to this new situation. How do you think you became someone like that? Because I can totally imagine other people relying on fate or fate in a way that, okay, whatever comes, or on others, like let the other people take care of it when I wait and cry and despair. But you do something opposite. You acquire skills and make a difference right away. Where does it coming from?
Yeah. So I do want to correct something. There were points of despair for me, right? Of particularly when we were in NICU. I don't care if it's a NICU in the United States, or a NICU in Poland. Any parent of a premature baby will, or I guess any child who's in a hospital or a child with cancer, they will tell you how overwhelmingly difficult it is to see your child in pain. and to see, or even if your child is struggling with RSV or like whatever it is, you do not want to see your child in the hospital. You don't. Because you know if they're in a hospital and they're in the hospital for more than 5 days and it's going on for weeks, it's not good. Right? They're fighting for their life or they're fighting in some capacity. So there were complete moments of despair. But the driving force was, I love my son. And what will it take to not just keep him alive, but to help get him well? And so that meant that I needed to learn medical terminology, that I needed to get over my depression and pray, and then also open up the doctor's notes, right? I needed to read through his medical chart. I needed to ask questions. I can't tell you how many times I asked different people to explain to me what am I looking at when I'm looking at this MRI? What is the difference between an X-ray, a CT scan, and an MRI? Why do we use, why is the X-ray not sufficient? Why is this, and them having to explain to me when we use these different imaging tests. I'm like, okay, when I'm looking at MRI and this area is black, what does that mean? They're like, the tissue is dead. I was like, oh. So when I saw his MRI, I was like, oh, this is serious. Because and I had to learn. I was thinking, oh, neurons can grow back, right? Brain tissue grows back like a liver. They're like, no, you're born like a woman with her ovaries. You're born with all of the neurons you're ever going to have at birth. Those neurons can grow in terms of making synapses and connections, but once they're lost, you can't get them back. And so that took me, I learned it immediately, but it took weeks to sink in, right? Because when you're dealing with grief, you can hear something, but processing it and then accepting it. So for me, it was the driving force of loving my son. And I promise you, when I learned that I was pregnant, it was a shock to me. But when I accepted, I was like, oh, I want a girl. I have a daughter already. I can handle a girl. When they said it was a boy, I was so disappointed. But when your child is born, it I don't know, for me at least, it was a profound and emotional experience. And then to see him in and out of the hospital was even more profound. So for me, the driving force was my love for him, but also prayer and faith that God, please heal him. Please get him out of the hospital again. And even in that prayer, Lord, please help me to understand and discern. And God, please lead me. And a lot of people will say, oh, you're just doing nursing school to be his caregiver. I was like, that was not an easy decision. After law school, I was firmly committed to being done with my education. I'm done. It's over. I'm going to be a practicing attorney. I'm going to be successful in my career. It's going to be great. Even when I found out when I was pregnant, I was like, all right, I'll have a baby. He'll go to daycare. Like life will be fine. That's not how it turned out at all. It's a far cry. And so through prayer, I set up the GoFundMe account, and that really helped with my initial costs for paying for all my prerequisite classes in like anatomy, biochemistry, chemistry, even chemistry. I'm like, I don't know how to do these calculations. I'm like calcium, Ca, and learning the periodic table again. I'm like, but I did it. I have a 3.82 GPA. Don't know how. Just prayer, just a whole lot of prayer. And then, sharing our story and speaking with other medically complex moms and people introducing me to other people like, do you know this mom? Her daughter also has cerebral palsy. And then learning, not all cases, but a couple other moms I met, she was like, oh yes, I'm also a nurse. And they're educating me about his diagnoses. They're like, ask about cortical visual impairment. Is he having tremors? Ask about this. And so there were huge moments of despair. Still moments even now as I'm struggling to get nursing back for Gabriel. He had it for 2.5 weeks and then it went away because of insurance and billing issues. So there are a lot of hard days.
And it looks clearly that you
Mhm.
have done your part, and I would say even beyond your part. But do you feel like the Cuyahoga County, Ohio as a state, federal government, or insurance companies doing enough to support people like you and Gabriel?
No. And let me put this in context. Compared to other countries, less developed countries, yes, right? But let me start here. Less developed countries, I think it's hard medically for a child with medically complex needs. And even a friend of mine, from Kenya and Uganda. She said, if your son had been born at 28 weeks, he would have died in my country. Right. He most likely would have died. And if he had lived like your son, he would have had disability. And it would have been difficult for that mother to afford his medical care. So I acknowledge that we are privileged in that sense, but in less developed countries, not always, but a lot more often, they have a family support system, right? You have other more affordable caregivers that you would obviously have to train, but could provide respite care. Respite care in the United States is so astronomically expensive, right? It's surreal. And in some what we call nursing assistants, they only make $17 or $18 an hour. And apartment rents are now $1,500 for a one bedroom in many places. So the salary doesn't match what we're asking them to do. So it's hard to get respite care. Do we have access to health care? Yes, but sometimes insurance doesn't want to pay for it. So parents end up with $1 million NICU bill. Sometimes they get denials for medically necessary care, whether it be a brain surgery, whether it be a heart surgery, whether it be an intestinal surgery. And then when it comes to ensuring that there's an income stream, if a parent does have to leave the workforce to become a full-time caregiver, those families are often without income. They are relying upon a husband or another partner to provide income. But if you are a single parent like myself, it is simply by the grace of God that we're able to survive. And it's the compassion of our community that has stepped in. I think all parents of medically complex children should not have to worry about income at all. I think there should be a minimum financial fund system that will pay their basic living expenses, mortgage, lights, whatever. I think they should have free health care, especially for the caregiver and the caretaker. But those things aren't in place. And since, and the UK is not a perfect system either. Their caregivers sometimes receive nothing, or they receive like £100 a month. They may have utilities paid, or they may have council housing, but those families are still largely poor. And so I think it's a very imperfect system. I think Cuyahoga County could do a lot better. So I guess in sum, I have to be grateful for what we do have, but there's so much that needs to be changed in terms of just providing a living income for families in this situation, or for parents of special needs children who cannot go to regular school, and they must, that is their full-time job. It is a job, right? That requires extraordinary care. So I think that needs to be in place, and parents shouldn't have to jump hoops with insurance companies and with state agencies, social service agencies, to get equipment, medically necessary equipment, or learning devices, or communicative devices, wheelchairs, medical beds. I'm talking like the whole gamut. These things should just be a matter of the doctor says this is medically necessary, and it's provided.
And if someone wants to support you watching this video, they will be able to find the respective links in the description to this episode. I would like to ask you also, what are the biggest lessons you learn about yourself from Zora and from Gabriel?
The biggest thing I've learned is that all things I have are from God. And I know a lot of people were like, well, how can you believe in God and this happened to your son? I believe in him regardless, right? Because he has provided so much. He's provided me with my intelligence, right? I didn't become intelligent on my own. I wasn't born with this innate ability to know how to read, to know how to think, to know how to be tenacious or resilient. Those things weren't things that I picked up on my own, right? I think we're all born with certain talents and character traits. And and I and I also have to thank my children as being a motivation, especially there were times I wanted to give up. I really did. And the biggest thing I've learned about myself is that I can learn new things. I can learn biology and anatomy, that it is possible. But the biggest thing is to just pray for resilience and not give up, because my children depend on me.
And we join you in this pray for resilience as you exemplify daily. My final question is, as our show is called Butterfly Effect, because we believe in those little changes that shake the entire universe, just as you do on every step of your life. What is your butterfly effect?
My butterfly effect is hoping that if there is a friend or family member, or even a mom who has a premature baby this very moment, this very hour, that my prayer is that your child has the most wonderful growth. But if not, know that that child is still a gift, right? That child still needs your overwhelming love and support, and that this is an incredibly hard time, but know that you are loved and that there is nothing you have done wrong for your child, and that the best thing that you can do is just be beside them every step. Just every step. Just give it one more second, one more minute, one more day. Keep going. Keep going.
Thank you so much, Catrice, and thank you for being this example that one can keep going in spite anything, any challenge in your life. Thank you so much.
Thank you.